All right. How's everybody doing out there today? This is Gold Pilled here with the Gold Pilled stream. And I got my mic situation all straightened out, I believe. The lapel mic that I was trying, I could not get it to work with the laptop. So my backup came in handy, and that was getting a USB mic. So I got a Snowball Ice, and it seems to sound pretty good. So we're going to roll with it. And if you ever see something kind of sticking up right here, that's my mic. So let's get into the video then. This video, as I mentioned before, is going to be about Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan experience, and his guests. And it's also going to kind of filter into some other IIA operations online here. So it's going to be a little long one, probably a little over an hour. Now, I planned to make this video weeks ago, before all the mainstream controversy surrounding Rogan started. And I'm kind of glad that, it waited so I got to see how everything played out. Because, his reaction and stuff has been interesting to say the least. So, the main purpose, or I guess the main point that I'm driving home here, is based on my discernment. Rogan and his podcast, Joe Rogan Experience, is a highly orchestrated gatekeeper. It's used to steer narratives however the intelligence companies see fit. And most likely it's IIA intelligence. They found Joe Rogan as an ideal gatekeeper because he has a huge reach and he's willing to play ball with them. And I'm not sure, how long he's been playing ball with them. But shekels talk. And he's probably been playing ball for a while. As we'll kind of go over here with some of his history. And Rogan is just like IIA's other top asset, Alex Jones and Infowars. He was a big one. And he's intelligence through and through. And guess who used to be besties? Earlier on in the truth movement, 5-7 years ago, Alex Jones and Joe Rogan, and they were besties for a reason. Alex Jones's Rogan interviews, they were always, some of the most popular on YouTube, reaching millions and bringing in countless others to the truth realm. And a lot of those would always break Rogan's record for views. That's always Alex Jones. He'd have him on again and he'd break the previous record. So, and it might even have been Alex that got Rogan, really into the IIA operations. They were so close, who else would have pulled him in, other than his already established Hollywood connections. But that's another story. But Rogan's collaborations with Alex Jones, it garnered him a lot of credibility in the eyes of the fake red-pilled sheep, many of whom are Christian conservatives. That's a big base, Alex Jones, and, by Rogan being with him, it brought that credibility, and eyes on him. They make up a huge group, and they trust way too easily, or way too readily, if a little bit of Christianity is sprinkled in there. So that's a major problem we have in the truth community. Now, Alex Jones has admitted numerous times that he's an actor, and others have corroborated this. And I think it was mostly in his court depositions. Now, this is 100% truth. If you can't see Alex Jones and Infowars for the IIA gatekeepers they are, at this point, you have a long way to go to being gold-pilled. So, if Alex Jones is an actor, then what's that make, Joe Rogan? Well, he's an actor too, and he might even be more so of an actor because, he's in Hollywood. Folks my age, they'll remember Rogan, really becoming kind of known with Fear Factor. That's a mainstream Hollywood show, network television. He's in people's living rooms weekly, when that show was running, and it was a pretty popular show. I've watched a few of them back then, before I was woke up, and then Rogan kind of moved into UFC, acting like he was a bigwig in there and doing announcing and commentating for it. And then I guess he moved on to comedy. He must have thought he was funny enough and he could be a comedian. And surprisingly, he's wildly popular in the Hollywood comedy clique. And he's even so popular that any old schmuck who ends up being bros with him can make a name for themselves in comedy, just on his back. Take Brendon, for instance. The guy is a total idiot schmuck. And, he manages to make it somewhat in comedy just on the back of Rogan. So, Rogan has influence in the Hollywood scene, He's a part of that club. And if I recall correctly, it was a Rogan interview with Alex Jones, or it was an interview Rogan did with somebody else, but it was right around the time that Alex was going through those court proceedings for being sued, and Rogan threw the truth community under the bus. I believe he called them schizos, for some of the fringe topics, that people dive into. He said they're schizophrenic. That's Rogan covering his butt and protecting his shekels. Just covering his arse. And it's pretty much just like now, how he's pandering to his lefty crowd with the multiple apologies that he's doing. He's saying, oh, I would support, what do they call them? The little notification links underneath the videos that YouTube started doing, where if you put a certain keyword in the title of your video, the AI will pick that up, and they'll put like a WikiLeaks link or something, or a CDC link underneath it that directs you right to the official narrative. And all that's doing is, telling his viewers that they're too dumb to discern information themselves. Just, here's the official link. You believe that, you're too dumb to think for yourselves. And I think that's an insult, to his viewer base. And then Rogan offered to have mainstream narrative guests on his show right after he would have a fringe guest on. So that would be like, his recent interview with Malone, which we're going to talk about here. So he would have Malone on. Well, the next episode he would have Sanjay Gupta on, to counter that fringe topic. So he said he'd be willing to even consider that, And another thing that he does, and it shows his hypocrisy, is there's videos out there of, when it comes down to, protecting shekels, he'll admit, kind of like Alex admits that he's just an actor. Rogan will be like, oh, well, I'm just a comedian, and I'm just a fight caller who smokes pot and takes roids, and, you shouldn't trust me. I'm just an idiot, and if you're coming to me for medical information, well, then you're foolish, because what do I know, I'm just a dumb comedian. So when it comes to protecting his shekels, Rogan's just a dumb idiot. But then when it comes to, I guess, kind of pushing the mainstream, or serving the narrative somehow, he's highly in the know and well-researched and, educated on the material. So you can't take him seriously at all. And there's been quite a few people who portray him as so informed and intelligent, on the subject matter that he wants to discuss on his shows. There was another clip I seen of him, and this is from, I want to say it's a YouTube video, but it could be another platform. It was called, like, The Duality of the Man, Joe Rogan or something, and Rogan he said, oh, I'm so researched, and I have a huge file on my phone of all these documents and references that I've saved for future reference, and I've read them all, and they're not just, dumb links. They're, CDC documents and, these other official things. And so there he's saying he's up to speed, on the material. And I believe the guest that he was talking to was saying that, oh, wow, all the people that you've interviewed in the past 2 years, through the C19 error, you should know so much and have learned so much from them. So other people, would be foolish, to question you because you're just so researched and studied, on the subject from everyone you talk to. So, what is it, Rogan? You're either smart and you know what you're doing and you know the subject matter, or you're just a dumb, roided out comedian whose information would be foolish to trust. Like, the hypocrisy with Rogan is, it's pretty bad, and, people need to see this. Now, I have a lot of show notes here, so if I look off to the side or something, I'm just reviewing, making sure I'm where I need to be. So, a perfect example of people bragging them up, besides the one I just said, is Robert Malone. He bragged Rogan up big time after his interview. Because ironically, Malone's very next interview was with Christy Lay of Infowars. And Malone said so adamantly how Rogan is smart and knowledgeable on the subject matter. He was so prepared with research and discernment. Also, he can bring that truth to you. Really bragging him up. And I S you not, Malone literally said that Rogan is, quote, consciously and intentionally a healer now. That's a direct quote from Malone. I call BS and LMAO. And coincidentally, or maybe ironically, Malone just came out, and it looked like a Twitter post, but he got his Twitter axed, so I don't know if it's Gab or something. But Malone put a statement on social media saying that the top owner of Spotify is also the top owner of Moderna. Oh, ain't that a quinky dink? So, what's Malone insinuating there? Is he insinuating, Rogan and his show may be a shill? Or is he taking a jab at Spotify, for the, willingness to look in and kind of impose a little bit of censorship surrounding Rogan, with some of the videos and stuff that they've removed? If he was directing it at Rogan, what happened to the he's so smart and bragging him up and down? That don't make any sense. And even so, if that claim is true, then there might be more to why Spotify acquired Rogan in late 2020, which is, the COVID era, kind of early on in the COVID era. So, if that's true, I would say it's pretty much guaranteed that, Spotify acquired Rogan. Probably specifically so they could steer the C19 narrative, because, they know the impact Rogan has compared to mainstream media. They got him to control and steer the C19 counter narrative. And, I personally believe Rogan is a willing participant in this. He's playing ball and he's in the know. So, enough of Rogan. As an individual, let's talk about JRE, the Joe Rogan Experience podcast. Now, since enough evidence exists to thoroughly convince me that Rogan is a willing player of the game, then his show, JRE, is also a player in the game. The Joe Rogan Experience is intentionally orchestrated, not just the subject matter, but even extending to the guests that come on it. And even when those guests come on, like the time that they come on. Now, I'm not saying all the guests, are intentional, because he has a lot of like hunting stuff and fighters and friends and comedians and stuff, but pretty much the bigger influencers that he has on are carefully orchestrated and timed. And, that's one of the reasons that JRE is so successful at steering narratives. I wrote down here some of Rogan's recent past guests, and there's a few curious ones, that he's had on here, all in the COVID era. And they were on for a reason, and whatever message that they were talking and discussing, was brought on at that time for a reason. Now, I was going to pull up Rogan's website and show you, but it's really not that exciting, and I was going to show the sponsored list for sponsors of his show, that's not real exciting either, so I'm going to skip that. But I will put the link to his site in the description, so if you want to check it out. His sponsor list isn't anything like Smoking Gun, like Pfizer sponsoring him, but there's still some well-known companies sponsoring him on there, and the list of sponsors he has is quite long, at least probably close to 24. And then once they list them, you go down, and it goes into each one individually, where whatever promo or discount you can get for his show word or whatever promo code, they show you how to get discounts. So even though all this controversy, there's a lot of people still willing to sponsor, Rogan. And his guest list is pretty extensive, so you got to go through there, and if you don't know who they are, look them up and see who exactly they are, what they do. But a couple notable ones that I wrote down here, mostly in the COVID era, and like I said, done for a reason, at whatever time. First one's Jordan Peterson. He's been on there 7 times. Now, I don't know what your thoughts are about Peterson. I really don't have a lot of thoughts on Peterson, because I don't follow the guy. I think he's a douchebag, and whatever he talks about is kind of stupid, and he just seems like a shill to me. So I don't look into him, but if he's on Rogan 7 times, there's a reason he's on Rogan 7 times. The next one's Dr. Peter Hotez. And ironically, or probably not ironically, but I'll probably be saying that a lot, Rogan had him on early on in the C19. And Peter Hotez is a doctor. He's pretty much CNN's shill doctor that comes on to push the mainstream narrative. So he was on Rogan early in the C19, pretty much just to shill the C19. Next, Blaire White. If you don't know who she is, or shall I say, I won't do that because it might be bullying. Look up Blaire White. She's on there for a reason, to reach Joe's vast audience. Then Dr. Zelenko was on Rogan, which we'll talk about a little bit later here. He was Trump's miracle doctor. Then we got good old Timmy Pool. Tim's been on there numerous times. The most notable I remember is when he was calling out the Twitter PR or something. Rogan brought Tim Pool on to be like a organic truther, to ask the questions that organic truthers would ask, even though Tim Pool couldn't be further from being a real truther. That guy is the biggest grifter that I've ever seen. He rides the fence, plays the two-party paradigm. He will do whatever he has to collect shekels. He will self-censor himself just to stay on YouTube and get the YouTube shekels. Hell, the guy just put together $1 million studio in his house. So who knows how much his house is worth. and it's a pretty nice studio, and he has a lot of cutting edge equipment. And I'm going to point this out because a lot of people like Luke Radowski, but Luke's like Tim Pool's right hand man now. He's on his show all the time, giggling and laughing. And they were just, I seen a clip where they were fighting for the First Amendment and giggling and whatever. Well, you're fighting for the First Amendment, but you self-censor yourself to get YouTube shekels. Tim Pool is a POS. You shouldn't even watch him. Like, he has no information that you can't get more in-depth information somewhere else. Even Luke Radowski. Now, I will admit, I keep tabs on Luke's YouTube videos, the one a day he puts out, just because he's pretty fast with current event headlines, than other people. And I like to hear some of the, current event headlines. So I'll listen to him, but he disgusts me too. Not as much as Tim Pool, but, and then they all got their master classes and selling their conservative patriot gear and this and that. It's just it's bread and circus. All right, so I'm going to move on from there because that's a little tantrum. Next, Ben Shapiro. You know what message he pushes out to Rogan's crowd. You got Jimmy Dore. He's just a lefty. However, his tune has changed. Whether it's genuine or not, he's starting to think differently after he supposedly got injured from his jab. So I have a little more respect for him, but still not much. And then you have Malone and McCullough, doctors, that caused this media storm. Then Dan Crenshaw, he's been on 3 times, most of which recently. So that's, some shilling. Ed Snowden being on. All I'm going to say is Snowden is an intelligence asset. An asset for whose intelligence? I'm not sure. I don't know if it's the US or Russia or another country. Who knows? But he's an asset for somebody. And then Mike Baker has been on Rogan 8 times. 5 of those times have been in the C-19 era. And if you don't know who Mike Baker is, he is a former CIA covert ops officer. So I haven't watched any of those. Don't plan on it. But I'm sure he was pushing some kind of narrative, especially 5 times in the C-19 era. You can best believe there was IIA manipulation going on there. Then you got Barry Weiss. She was on 3 or 4 times recently. And she was a big one that got a lot of mainstream publicity, and clips made the rounds in the alternative media where she was pushing the crumbling narrative that's currently happening. So I guarantee you she was on there for a reason, because if you know who Barry Weiss is, prior to this agreeing with the counter narrative now, she's a super lefty who would throw you under the bus in a minute. But now all of a sudden, she's on the counter narrative bus to C-19. So her thing was intentional. Then you have old Sanjay Gupta, the lame CNN doctor. And the whole reason they had him on there was so our hero Joe could give him a good scolding too. CNN ran Rogan's name through the mud. And we got to stand up for that. So they put Gupta on there, and Joe gave him a stern talking to. And, oh, our hero, Joe. Oh, you're calling out CNN. Yay. Just utter. I don't know if it's just me or what, but all these theatrics and stuff that's in the current truth movement, it's low IQ. I mean, it's pretty easy to see, and it's low IQ to where I don't even like to watch it because I feel it makes me dumber. I'm trying to get other people to see that, and to get on that gold build level. So that's all the, the notable guests I had pointed out. Like I said, Rogan's whole platform is IIA operation. I firmly believe it. Just take the mainstream media shite show, that's taken place in, mainstream view due to Rogan having Dr. McCullough, and then Dr. Malone on episode 1747 and then episode 1757. And then you factor in the other guests that, he's had on, within months surrounding those two doctors, and even the guest, within the C19 era. And, well, speaking to the more recent ones, it's pretty apparent that it was time to allow these alternative narratives, the counter narrative to C19, it was time to allow that into the mainstream. It's like I said, it's done intentionally. So why are they putting the counter narrative out into the mainstream? The question is why? Why are they doing that? It's being done for a reason, and the handful of the most popular truth doctors, they've really been making the alternative media rounds. They're practically on every truth channel. And, the select few most popular ones, they've probably been on, quite a majority of the truth channels, all of them. But the question is still why? Why are they allowed, to be out there? Excuse me. And, what I say is perhaps the official narrative really is crumbling, and a majority of the sheep, are semi-waking up, to the C19 con, and they want to be out in front of it, and they want to control, precisely how it crumbles. Or perhaps, they're crumbling the official narrative on purpose because, it's part of their bigger plan. Maybe it's just time for them to crumble the narrative because whatever their plan is, it's actually going to serve that plan, whether we see it now or not. And then you got, maybe they just, want the truth community to think that the official narrative is crumbling when it's really, still going according to plan. Many sheep, when they see people speaking out, fighting the system publicly online, on these shows and the bigger platform shows like Rogan, it's like a pressure release for people. They become docile, they become complacent, and they take no action. They just stay behind their computer screen in the house and, don't do anything. Someone else is going to bat for them, so there's no need for them to take action. The battle's being fought, without their participation. And most sheep, they're lazy, and they will eagerly take the easy way out. And, that's to watch other people and think, oh, it's getting handled. No need, for me to exert any effort, or get up off the couch. So there's many angles of propaganda, and propaganda would not be effective if it wasn't convincing. So that's why the limited hangouts are so successful, because, they put out a lot of truth, a lot of truth that they don't, care that it gets out. And people hear that truth, and they recognize it, and they ultimately trust, the source, who's telling them, this truth. And then they start mixing in the lies and the cons, and the real narrative they, that they want, the real objective they want to achieve. And the people take it all as truth. So, and that's all propaganda. A limited hangout, a certain one, it might be 95% truth, but that 5% lies, that's still propaganda, and it's still serving a purpose for them. So really think about that and remember that. All right, enough of Rogan and his podcast. Let's talk about, some of his recent guests here, and then we'll kind of move off into more general IIA. So that way you can really put two and two together regarding the impact of, the Rogan experience on the masses of sheep. And we'll start with Dr. McCullough, because it's going to be real quick to cover McCullough. Now, McCullough was on the Rogan prior to Malone by about a week, but you don't hear too much about McCullough in the mainstream. That's mainstream news and, like mainstream internet, like, alternative truth channels. You don't hear much controversy about him on Rogan. It's all about Malone. And there's a reason for that. And the reason is, I believe Dr. McCullough is legitimate. He's not an asset. He's not playing the game. He's a legit doctor that's, trying to inform people, about the real truths. I haven't seen any red flags from him. In a later interview that he did after Rogan, he stated how he just brought his laptop to the podcast and went over factual data the entire time with Joe. There's no need to play the mainstream media buzz, with that. He's just showing factual stuff from a laptop. Now, Malone, on the other hand, they can't talk about him enough, him and Rogan. And one reason why I think Malone is a willing player of the game, and there are many reasons why, and maybe even he might be a direct agent. There's many reasons why for that too. But there's so many red flags with this guy, and we're going to go over them. So apparently, Malone did an interview with Infowars immediately after the Rogan podcast. Well, not surprising, especially if you think he's an asset. It would not be surprising to go from Rogan to Infowars. However, I understand there's the alternative view that Rogan and, Jones and Infowars' location being so close together, he scheduled them one after the other for him to be in the area. And that was probably a big factor, but I believe there's other intent, behind that. Now, his Rogan podcast was December 31st, 2021, and his Infowars interview podcast was January 1st, the very next day. So he literally went right from Rogan to Infowars the next day. And right off the start in the interview, he had nothing but great things to say about Rogan, as I discussed earlier. But he had some other interesting things to say. So let's watch a quick clip from his Infowars interview, and then I'm going to go over all the other interesting tidbits that he said. So let me mute my mic, share my display, and we will watch that interview, or that clip.
It's, Christy, another thing, I was talking to another podcaster the other day, a small local one in Tennessee, and a very intellectual woman. And we got talking, and I said, because I was fast-tracked, as a young person, because of testing and things like that, when I was in 4th and 5th grade, I was reading 1984, Brave New World, those kinds of books and the Greek classics. And I got the question of why it was so easy for me to kind of break free of the assumptions and see through the media manipulation. I think that was part of it. It's deep in my soul. It's like, wired into my childhood brain. And, but we are seeing full-on Orwellian Ministry of Truth now. There's no holds barred. And what Twitter's doing right now, that I think, with Alex Berenson's bold and brave lawsuit taking on Twitter.
All right. So you heard a little tidbit of his early childhood. So, excuse me. So apparently, old Malone was fast tracked as an early child. Now, I don't know if they still do that to children, or that was just back in his era, but the term fast track to me is an intelligence term. And I've heard it from a few truthers now about being fast tracked, whether it was in high school, college, or military. They were fast tracked. And what that tells me is the intelligence, government, they wanted to fast track them because they were highly intelligent and highly valuable, and they wanted to fast track them into their service, in serving the intelligence community. So if this guy was fast tracked as a child, that right there should kind of tell it all. And then, not only does he say, he was fast tracked, he goes on to say that, he was so smart, he was reading books like 1984 and The Brave New World in 4th, 5th grade. That's pretty hard to imagine, a child reading that and reading those books specifically. So, is that true? Did he really read those books? Or is that just BS lie, that he's putting out there as an asset, knowingly putting that out there to, give him more credibility in the truth movement? Because he knows those books, they're pretty popular in the truth movement, and a lot of references are made to them in the truth movement. So, is that an attempt to garner cred from the truth community, or was he really reading those types of books in 4th or 5th grade? So that's very interesting right there. And then what he said next was, by reading those type of books, excuse me, that's why it was so easy for him to wake up. He said it kind of red pilled a part of, it red pilled a part of his soul. And that's why it was so easy for him to break free. And I'm assuming break free of the Matrix. But it red pilled his soul, made him easy to break free. And then he says it got wired into his childhood brain. So to me, that sure seems like he's been seeing things clearly since he was a kid. But he still grew up serving the beast system his entire life, up until a couple years ago. And he only blew the whistle within, the last year or two. How do you go on that long being blind to everything, but you were red pilled as a child? So just that clip there is really telling. Remember that clip. Think about that clip. Discern it. Ponder it. Check out some of his other interviews and see if, he dabbles into any more stuff. Because that clip is very telling. Very telling. And, I call BS. BS on him not knowing, what he was doing this whole time. So, now, let's touch on how he served the beast system, for his career. And this information is from, this Infowars video. And I'm going to link, all the videos and sites that I talk about. All the links will be in the description. So you can click on them, go watch them in full. I highly encourage you to do so you can hear all the information. I just touch on, the more important stuff. So later on in the interview, he admits to being right in the heart of Big Pharma for a very long time. He was the CEO of a big pharma company called Etheric, at one point. His wife, Jill, she is also a scientist, in the big pharma industry with him. He was at the Salk Institute, which is a pretty big name in that industry. And I'm not sure if his wife, Jill, worked there with him, but I believe so. But I might be wrong. But he was at the Salk Institute. He also states that he was at something that sounded like Davies or Davies for the AIDS hype, / epidemic. I couldn't tell exactly what he said, where. It sounded like Davies, but It wasn't Davos. It sounded like Davies or something. But he was there, and he knew and was well aware of Fauci. Well, if you've looked into, Fauci a little bit, you will see that he has had the control of handing out the majority of big pharma research money for a long time. So Malone was possibly beholden to Fauci at some point, if he was there in the AIDS thingy. And Kerry Mullis called out Fauci as just being a useless mouthpiece who knows nothing, and he would annihilate him in a debate. So how does smart as a whip Dr. Malone not deduce the same thing about Fauci, especially if he's working right there with him? Malone was a pioneer of the mRNA platform. Well, who was behind creating or doing that platform? DARPA, Department of Defense. They were the ones, behind the platform development. So there's Dr. Malone working for DARPA and the Department of Defense. And remember, fast-tracked as a child. But he just woke up and blew the whistle very recently. Malone also says it wasn't until the International COVID Summit in Rome that he realized that Big Pharma has control over the CDC. Seriously? He just realized that at the International COVID Summit in Rome, which is the C-19 era. Now, in another interview he did, I can't remember, which one specifically, he said he knew of the dangers of the mRNA if it was used down the path of vaccines. So he's aware, of what the mRNA gene therapies are. They're not really the jabs. Yet he still took them. He still got vaxxed himself. I'm pretty sure he's vaxxed. I'm not buying that. Not buying that. He knew what they, were doing, knew the dangers, knew what they were doing with it, in terms of gene therapy vaccines was dangerous, but yet he still took it. This guy, he's so full of contradictions. Many contradictions with this guy. And most people, they'll never catch on to this, unless they devote the time, and, have the intellect to, do a lot of research. Or they have someone else point it out to them. And that's my purpose here. Not everybody can do what I do. But since I'm in the position, knowing and seeing things the way I do, I feel that I have the need to point them out to people and, try to help people. Try to get them woke up and try to get them gold-pilled. And I also heard on the show Slow News Day, he was also very suspect, I might add. But Steve, the host, he was saying how Malone has been on Steve Bannon's podcast many, many times of recently, to where he's practically a co-host there now. And while he's on there, he keeps making claims that there are people, within the system fighting for us, the little guy, and kind of pushing, the two-party paradigm Trump train shilling. And, vote harder for change, you just gotta vote harder. Well, to me, that sounds an awful lot like the retarded Q psyop, with the hopium and all that nonsense we experienced years ago. And thankfully, it's died down a lot, but there are still people out there believing Q. But that's what it sounds like Malone's been doing on Bannon. And I haven't really gone there, research into this, but I believe Steve, saying that. It's a stupid thing to lie about when it's, easily provable. So, there's just another, part of the counter narrative that they want you to trust from Malone. He's like a limited hangout himself. He puts out a lot of good information. He garners your trust. And then he throws in, the lies, the lying narrative, and people take it, with all the truth, down the hatch. So, another statement Malone made and it was in that Infowars interview, he called Twitter and Wikipedia information warfare. Now, you know, Infowars is short for information warfare, and that was named intentionally. You know, they named that show Information Warfare, you know, for a purpose. How poetic. You know, it's information warfare, but it's not the little guy, you know, putting out truth to fight the system. It's the system's information warfare to stifle and enslave the little guy. And I don't think it's a coincidence that Malone's Twitter got axed right after his Rogan podcast. Because that does two things. It reinforces his credibility, you know, for the truther group, because, you know, he's censored, you know, he got deleted from Twitter and can't be on YouTube with those interviews. So that bolsters the credibility in the truther eyes. But at the same time, the lefty side, you know, who's against him, it makes him look like a quack, you know, and kind of like a charlatan, where they're like, oh, you know, he got deleted and censored. Well, then, you know, what he's saying is just BS. You know, we shouldn't trust him. So it serves both sides doing that, you know, this censorship stuff. And I talked about that in my YouTube video, how when the big censorship wave that they came in with, and I forgot to mention it in the YouTube videos, it wasn't just the censorship, it was the demonetization wave that they kicked in about the same time, right before they really started censoring, they started demonetizing. And that just roused the groups up. You know, both sides, the ones that support them and the ones that don't. The ones that support them, it reinforces they're credible and trustworthy, and the other ones, it reinforces they're quacks and they shouldn't be trusted. Like they know exactly what they're doing with these IIA operations. Now, I'm going to touch on another doctor quickly, but not because I think she's IIA, but just because she has a weird connection to Malone, and, you know, was in the mainstream headlines recently because of Malone's notoriety recently. And that's Dr. Meryl Nass. And I've seen a couple interviews with her, but apparently they've been blasting her as being Dr. Malone's doctor. Apparently she prescribed him ivermectin. I'm assuming that's before he was vaccinated, because you know, the vax should work for him, but maybe it wasn't. And also in the headlines, she had her the state Maine, their doctor license pulled. And she has to go through a psych eval, or a re-education, you may call it, before she can have it granted back. And I don't think that it was pulled because she's Malone's doctor and gave him ivermectin. I think it was something else she did. But it was probably related to giving out prescriptions like ivermectin. And if you go to her website, you can see she has a lot of good articles and blog posts and all kinds of stuff. And from what I can tell, she's pretty legit. It seems like she has been fighting the system for decades. And her site will be linked in the description. You know, I encourage you to go check it out. She goes clear back to the whole anthrax nonsense that was taking place, and she was speaking out, and, you know, a big opponent to the whole anthrax thing. So she seems legit and credible, and she was in on that anthrax from the beginning. So I mentioned her just because that connection, but I believe she's pretty legit. No red flags there, as I see. Now, the next doctor discuss, and he was a recent Rogan guest, is that Dr. Zelenko. Dr. Oybe Zelenko. Now, if you're gold-pilled, all you need to know is Zelenko was Trump's doctor, the one who treated Trump for C-19. Now, that should be enough said. Now, sadly, not many people are gold-pilled, so let's talk about him a little bit more. This guy is a willing player of the game. I can almost guarantee it. He reeks of it. And when I say willing player, I mean they will shill whatever it is as long as they get shekels. As long as the shekel amount is correct, they will play ball. So that doesn't mean everyone is an intel agent, directly. They know that they're directly working with intelligence. Many people will just do anything for money. It's sad, but it's a big fact of life. Money talks. So people will play ball and they will lie to your face, if the shekel amount is right. Now, that's not to say that Dr. Zelenko isn't an agent, because I very well believe he is. And, it could be USA or, another country's intelligence agency. I won't say their name, but if you catch my drift. And Dr. Zelenko, well, let's say his type with power cannot be trusted, if you catch my drift there. So yeah, the one who initially treated Trump for C-19, and the treatment was touted as a huge success. Huge success treating Trump with prophylactics and Regeneron or whatever, and cured him instantly. Well, here's the question. If it was so successful, why did Trump go through with Operation Warp Speed? Why didn't he just initiate the treatment that he got for everyone else? Nope, that jab for everybody on the planet was planned a long time ago. I'm not quite sure how long ago, but probably decades. Now, Dr. Zelenko is a little easier to see as an agent or a shill. If you're not as in-depth of a researcher as I am, because you catch, one or two of his interviews, and he puts out a lot of fringe stuff. Now, his position of power and what he is makes him, the perfect person to be working with them and, putting out a counter narrative. And he's been making all the rounds like Malone. Quite a bit of rounds. He's been on a lot of the shows I watch. But he takes his, info a step further and goes into like deep fringe truth topics. And that's why it's easy, to spot him, as being a shill agent. Very likely because he'll go on, these shows, semi-mainstream and stuff, and then he'll start talking about global cult plans of mass genocide and demonic Luciferian agendas and kind of flat earth type stuff. Now, regardless whether some of those actually have validity, and I believe some of them topics, they do have validity. There is truth to those. But what it does is, one, it sends low IQ sheep down very deep rabbit holes that they will, never fully discern. And it just distracts and occupies them. And, sends them kind of in a wrong direction or unimportant direction. Instead of concentrating on something more important, and something, more pressing, they're looking in the, dumb things like flat earth type stuff or, stuff that they will never fully figure out. And then the second thing it does is it makes the truth community look like idiots. It makes us look like fools in the mainstream media and mainstream in general. Those topics immediately garner, that we're dumb, foolish, and, to quote Joe Rogan, schizo. So him doing that is the big red flag that, he's pushing counter narrative. He's a limited hangout, and, he's likely working directly with somebody up higher. In fact, I just watched an interview with Dr. Zelenko on a podcast on a channel called FlyOverConservatives. Now, I don't follow them, but I follow this channel called Data Dumper on BitChute, and they posted the interview, and I watched it. Now, I highly recommend Data Dumper because they collect videos and interviews from all different corners of the truth community, and they post them up on BitChute. And a lot of them can be very insightful. And I've discovered quite a few interesting channels that I normally, wouldn't have come across. Well, this interview with Zelenko on FlyOverConservatives was a good example of, how the truth community has been co-opted so heavily, like I discussed in my YouTube video. Now, this FlyOverConservative channel is blatantly an IIA operation. It's a typical low IQ, right-wing Christian conservative pandering channel that popped up in the wake of the Trump administration. And there were numerous channels like that popped up in the wake of Trump. Exactly what I said there. Low IQ, right-wing Christian conservative pandering. There were so many of them in the wake of Trump, and a lot of them are still going. And you should already probably know that Trump won the election in 2016 by using online data mining, in order to get his talking points and, know what to say. If you noticed, Trump always knew exactly what to say, to rile the people up and get them on his side. That's from online data mining. And, they seen how successful it was. And, these operations just kicked in and expanded 100-fold since that election. And FlyOverConservatives is one of these operations. I can guarantee it. Now, everything shouts IIA from their channel name, FlyOverConservative, which, if you think of that, it's the dirty redneck, hillbilly, uneducated people in middle America that, all the elite just fly over and, don't care about, they never see. We just fly over them, the peasants. They're underneath, beneath us. The names of their hosts, which there's two of them that host this channel, and their name is David and Stacy, but their last name is Whited. White with a D on the end. Whited. So there's a pandering to the white. And they are big Republican two-party paradigm Trump shilling. They even hustle My Pillow. So if you're hustling My Pillow, you should know to take what they say with a grain of salt, and they're just shilling. And they like to play the Jeebus card. Now, anyone that uses Jesus or Christianity or Catholicism to grift off of, I call it playing the Jeebus card. Adam Green with No More News, he calls it the Jesus money. They're all about getting that Jesus money. I call it playing the Jeebus card. But they're real big on that. They play the Jeebus card all the time. And, all this put together in their show, this is the ideal layout to dupe normies into trusting a limited hangout operation and to steer their supposedly red-pilled beliefs. There's so many people think they are red-pilled, but they're still fast asleep in reality. They fall for interviews like this one, pushing trust this, high-level J doctor, and praise Jesus. And because they're so aligned with all this stuff, they trust it. And like I said, there are so many of these cookie-cutter channels, that popped up in, the wake of the Trump administration, which, it just corroborates my observations and belief that IIA, really went into high gear after 2016. And these limited hangout channels, they're spread out over several alt media platforms. Many of them have never had a YouTube presence. Another good example of an IIA operation is the Stu Peters show, with the host Stu Peters. Now, the show and Stu Peters himself just reek of intelligence. I mean, he looks like a military intelligence chode. Just his tight cut haircut and the way he presents himself, and it's pretty obvious. And I'm pretty sure he was never on YouTube. When he always says where you can find him, it's some obscure platform that he has. It has something red something in it, which, that's, Republican pandering, reaffirming the two-party paradigm. And I only discovered the Stu Peters show recently, within the last year or so, and that's because of Data Dumper sharing some interviews and information that he had. So I never even would have known about him, because I'm at the point where I have my set channel as I go for information, and I'm really not out there looking for new stuff, because I found pretty good sources, and I stick with that for current events and stuff. So never would have found Stu Peters, if not for Data Dumper. But as soon as I seen, the first one, I was like, whew, this guy is, intelligence. It just reeks of it. And the other thing is, the Stu Peters show and many others, they have very high production value, as do all of the suspected IIA operation channels do. Where do all these channels pop up from with high production value seemingly out of nowhere? It's hard to grassroots build a channel, in order to get enough support, just for minor things, even, support for semi-high production value, let alone the production value that these people have. And usually YouTube is a requirement, to reach that point. Because, YouTube, that's where a majority of viewers are, and that's where you got to start out and build a base. And then maybe after you get it big enough, you can move, off to another alternative media site, and hopefully enough, will follow you. But you got to kind of start on YouTube. Yet these, suspected shill channels, they just pop out of nowhere, right off the bat on alternative platforms with high production value right out the gate. And based on my years of observation and research of the truth community, and watching many truth channels, grow and evolve, there's no other explanation than IIA operations for a lot of these channels. And a good question is, who's funding these channels? And, who's giving them artificial support in order to attract others? Someone is funding and handling these shill channels. They wouldn't have to almost get artificial support on an alternative platform, to get, a big enough audience to support them and their high production value, because, like I said, it's hard to do unless you start on YouTube. And another good question is, who is creating and funding all these alternative platforms? Because there's a lot of alternative platforms now. And, it's not just the popular ones like Odyssey and BitChute, Rockfin. There's obscure ones, like Band.video and whatever that Stu Peters is on. And then you got Brand New Tube and a bunch of others I can't even remember offhand. But just go look for alternative video platforms. There's a bunch of them. And they all have a fraction of the user base that YouTube has. Yet, these suspected shill channels, they've all managed to pop up there and seem to be an up and running, fully user supported, channel. And the platforms, somehow they've all been funded into existence. There's money coming from somewhere. It takes money to build a popular video site or even a decent video site. So there's behind the scenes money, a lot of it, flowing into this truth community that now exists. Now, this widespread shill network of, alternative platforms is intentional ops too. As I touched on in YouTube video, this breaks the truth community down into smaller groups, more disconnected from each other. And it's easier to maintain these smaller groups in complacent echo chambers, doing nothing but agreeing with each other. And it's funny that I'm saying, it's just echo chambers doing nothing but agreeing with other, but we're going to check out a little clip from Brendon O'Connell where he states just that. I'm not sure if it's in the clip I'm going to show you, but he said it numerous times. We just sit there and agree with each other. Yep. Are you mad? Are you irate about what's going on? Yep, I'm irate. Are you irate? Yep, I'm irate. And it just goes back and forth. No one takes action. They're echo chambers. And that's probably the real purpose behind creating this multitude of alternative platforms, to break them down into smaller groups, get them disconnected, easier to control, and easier to steer. Now, another example of high production value is the FlyOverConservatives. Now, they actually have a short code texting service for their sheeple followers to join and get text updates about right-wing Christian conservative pandering. They actually have a text service, this channel, who, to my knowledge, I didn't really look into it, but to my knowledge, they've never been on YouTube. So wherever they do their show, they just popped up. They have high production value and even have texting service. So where's that funding coming from? That's agenda funded without a doubt. And I imagine that these channels collect a hefty monthly check to continue doing whatever they do. In fact, I believe a majority of supposed truth channels receive monthly checks. Whether they're anonymous checks or not. But they know they're getting paid to toe a specific line. And they step out of the line, well, no more checks are coming in. And Brendon O'Connell even, has talked about this numerous times about, the behind-the-scenes money. And if they don't toe the line, the checks stop coming in. He even admits that he was getting money. And he changed tune about something and the check stopped. So he's even kind of admitting to being a shill. And if you haven't seen my Brendon O'Connell video, I highly recommend it. It's a pretty good critical analysis. But I still like Brendon the best. Besides Last American Vagabond and maybe another one or so. I think his information is kind of the most on point. But I still think he's likely an agent himself. I don't know what counter-narrative or part of the agenda they're trying to achieve with Brendon out there putting out what he's putting out. But I believe it's something. There's some reason that he's out there doing what he's doing. And in this little clip we're going to watch, he even admits to it. So I don't know what to say about Brendon O'Connell there, but follow him, watch his work, keep tabs on the information he has because it's good. Even if, he is an agent, just like with all these, even if they all are agents, the truth part that they do put out is good information. You just have to be on the level where you can discern it. You got to be able to separate the wheat from the chaff. And like I said, not a lot of people can do that. So, that's why I'm trying to help. So, let's go over and watch that Brendon O'Connell clip here real quick. And then we'll come back.
As these new laws come into being, and you watch them come into the north of the United States. They want to send you all south, all the gun owners, all the patriots will head south, and they're going to build those universal basic income, 5G, UN habitat, smart cities, surveillance states. They're going to build them in the north. They're doing it a bit at a time in the US. They'll get everyone eventually, and they're going to hold you in place with big stars, and they're going to get your attention. They're going to highly produce. They're going to have all the latest equipment. They're going to have studios. They're going to be another Joe Rogan on 180 million a year. And what, he's a journalistic dissident? You can't see that? It scares the shit out of me that people can't see it. It's fucking scary. They hound us, they harass us, they hack us offline. Who remembers the skunk? Who remembers the skunk? 2008, 13 million views, 13 million individual viewers a month. And what did they do? Former military intelligence, Vietnam era. He had 2 lines a picture, 2 lines a picture, 2 lines a picture, then a conclusion. He said, Brendon, you're an excellent poster, but you're too long-winded. You've got to shorten it down. You've got to get it in 5 minutes. That's how much he built up. Spelling mistakes, things were wrong. It was always a big joke at the time. The skunk, you've never heard of it, most of you. He went first, 2008. They cracked down. Operation Cast Lead, 2009. 2008, Nick Griffin went down. All the organic ones, whatever you think of their politics, the organic people were taken out and they were replaced. Everybody went down. They were scared. Julian Assange comes out, WikiLeaks, so he can get rid of people via WikiLeaks and Julian Assange. They can start dropping materials into the public domain, start threatening networks, start getting rid of people anonymously. Then you have Operation Cast Lead 2009. They realised they were in deep trouble. They're moving forward. Then you have the Edward Snowden comes out. Everyone's being tracked. Everyone's being traced. All the big players just disappear. The people who had pseudonyms, the journalists, the mainstream journalists who wanted to speak their minds on Liberty Forum and other places, the university professors, they all went. They all got offline. And we were left with the shit. And by 2014, I got out of jail and the old internet was gone, and it was now a McDonald's burger stand, posing as an organic food market. And they've got me sitting here and I'm thinking, where can we put Brendon in this grand scheme? Because in this controlled release, we'll probably want to talk about those other issues. Yep, he fits a psychological profile. Prefer it if he was married and had a kid or something and maybe a mortgage, he'll be more controllable. But we'll keep him in the cold. We'll let him earn a living for now. Give him enough money. We'll decide what to do with him later. So I'm there. I'm backstage. I haven't been called onto the main stage yet. But you need to know we're all in this grand theatre. We've got to get the narrative out there. If you want to learn, this is my UN document. There's a lot of excellent information in here. A lot.
All right. So that little clip there from Brendon, that's very important information, if it's true. Very important. You know, he speaks about really early in the truth community, you know, circa 2006 to 2008. And if he is an asset, that information is very likely true. If he's not an asset, it's still possibly very true. So remember that information. The link to that video will be in the description. Go follow him on YouTube. Watch his videos. He has a lot of good info. And he speaks about, you know, how the truth community fell apart by 2014. You know, like he said, it was a burger, you know, Mickey D's posing as an organic, you know, market. And sadly, I really got into, you know, the truth movement in 2016. So I missed so much stuff. But everything that I've observed from 2016 till now is a heck of a lot. There's been a lot of change, and, you know, the operations have really kicked into high gear. So they've been at this a very long time. And, you know, then he talks about how he was, you know, being kept there, you know, on back burner, you know, to be put out and whatnot. And so it's a good bit of information there, and figure I'd share that because I was mentioning him, and I was wondering where he was at there for a while. You know, I didn't see him for a week or two. Well, he had a 2-week suspension on YouTube, so he's just back now. So, moving on. So yeah, you have all these new alternative media platforms with all these newer alternative media / truther channels spread out, you know, all over them. It's literally like the new mainstream media for truth dabblers. You know, they got people who maybe question some narratives just to shift from traditional mainstream media over to a more unique mainstream media. You know, i.e., you know, truth media. Meanwhile, the sheep have no idea that they're still being herded down the ramp, you know, or up the ramp, you know, whichever direction it goes, into the slaughterhouse. Or if you want to be a little less gory, they're being herded into the pen. And, that's why I call most online truthers, not so much the channels, but, everyone that's in the community, looking for information, viewing the material and content, I call them fake red pilled. They've been permitted to learn a little truth via limited hangouts, but they're still kept fast asleep on the major issues, and they're none the wiser. Boy, they think they're awake, they know it all. They're red pilled. They're not red pilled. They're not. And that's where you need the high intellect to realize this. Because like I said, the propaganda wouldn't be effective if it wasn't convincing. And there's so many layers of the subversion onion that they put out that there's not many people that can see through it or not get caught in it, somewhere. And even me, I probably get caught in some stuff, a little bit knowingly and probably some unknowingly. That's how deep and subversive it is. That's why I'm going to keep saying it's so important to, obtain gold pill level. You'll see all of this so much more clearly, if you take the gold pill. The IIA has infiltrated and co-opted the truth community so deeply. It's so ingrained in the truth community that it's like a fast-spreading cancer. You can't cut it out. The tentacles reach, in every, little nook and cranny, and it's in there. We're not getting rid of it, and it's only getting worse. And they've been, so wildly successful at controlling and steering any counter narratives outside the mainstream realm. And I don't believe it's coincidence how these certain doctors, popped up, roughly the same time and made all of the alternative media rounds together. It's almost guaranteed that, a percentage of them are controlled, agents, or they're ball players for the shekels. We'll take a real quick look at a list of doctors that are considered censored online. And the link will be in the description, so you can check it out yourself. But let's check that out here. So this is the censored doctors list. And very first one, Dr. Robert Malone. Then you got McCullough. Oh, good old Zelenko. So far, McCullough, I seems legit. Gary Mullis, he was legit. And very suspiciously, he just died months prior to the C-19 breaking out. Yeah. Michael Yeadon, I'm not so sure about him, but he's former Pfizer VP. So I don't know if he woke up and changed his tune, but that's suspect. You can go down and see all these doctors. I know a Dr. Young's a pretty good one. Sherry Tenpenny, she seems legit. Seems like she's been fighting for a while. This Northrop, she seems to be all right from what I've seen for her. This Jane Ruby is on old Stewie Peters almost every day. I don't know if I trust her. She just seems real shady. You scroll down, there's a whole long list. Andrew Kaufman, he seems to be one of the more legit ones. The Brian Artis seems to kind of be more legit. Keep scrolling, I don't know too many of these ones. And you keep going down, there's a whole list. But you can go check that out for yourself. I'm going to dive too much into that. But yes, there's all these doctors, but you really only hear, about a small percentage of them. I think that's intentional. And I've noticed the more credible doctors, they call the jab for what it is. While most, the other doctors, the suspected shill ones, they still call it a vaccine. If you're not up to speed, this jab is technically not a vaccine. It's considered a gene therapy and, part of a platform is not a vaccine. Even though they might have changed the definition of what a vaccine is, so that it falls under that. And I'm pretty sure they did, but it's not. So the more credible ones seem to call it, a gene therapy or a jab or whatever. They don't call it a vax. But, the most popular, doctors being spread around like Malone and them, they still refer to it as a vax. And, if you're that educated and, you're a truther doctor, you should be calling it what it is. Because even though that's like a small, small thing, a seemingly small thing, that's very powerful as a psyop. That gets in your, subliminal consciousness. Vaccine, it's a vaccine, it's a vaccine, it's a vaccine. And it has an impact on your thinking, whether you know it or not. So I don't care for the people who, keep calling it a vax. Call it a gene therapy or call it something else, but don't call it that. Because like I said, small but powerful. So, all right. Let's wrap this up kind of in a summary. Basically, Rogan and, Joe Rogan Experience, they're just gatekeepers. Gatekeepers, they're controlling the release of counter-narratives to the mainstream when needed, and steering existing counter-narratives to better serve the overall agenda. That's all he is. If Rogan was truly as smart in researched as, he's portrayed, and, other people portray him, and he even portrays himself, when needed, if he's that smart and researched, and he genuinely wants to help people, he could easily do so much good. So much good. Just think of all the good he could do with his viewer base. But he doesn't. Being a wealthy member of the club is more his style, so he plays ball. Batter up. Rogan's up. A good example is in another recent interview Rogan did after he had these doctors on. And the interview was some Aussie. I don't know who he is, but he's from Australia, so I'm calling him an Aussie. And they were talking about myocarditis. And Rogan was kind of on the side that, the jabs are causing myocarditis. And the Aussie was claiming that C19 causes myocarditis. Well, Rogan could have easily shut that conversation down with a little critical thinking. And if he was researched and, brushed up to speed on the topic prior, like, he supposedly is, he should have had that at the ready. And, he didn't. Well, what he should have said was he should have argued that, hey, yeah, supposedly you can get myocarditis from C19, but it's less common, than from the jab. Plus, you have to get C19 first to even have a risk, of getting the myocarditis. However, if you take the jab, you are guaranteeing a risk of getting myocarditis. And on top of that, you can still get C19 after being jabbed, which would just then, increase your risk of getting the myocarditis by who knows how much. So Rogan could have shut that down right there, but, he didn't. And of course, this depends on whether myocarditis, is truly a possibility from getting C19. I don't know if it is. I don't think any ordinary person knows what it is, unless you're one of the scientists studying this, but I really haven't heard anybody who has gotten myocarditis just from having C19. So, that whole, narrative that they're using against the, to argue about the vax causing it, I don't think that holds any water, because like I said, I never heard of anybody getting myo from C19, but I've heard plenty of people getting myo from the jab. So, like I said, that could just be BS made up to increase the fear factor narrative, because the whole C19 narrative is based on fear. So throw in, hey, you can get myocarditis from C19. Well, up goes the fear. And when I say it increases the fear factor narrative, that's pun intended. So, but, Rogan, he didn't do any of that. What happened to all-knowing and well-studied on the material Rogan? Well, he was absent. Must have smoked too many bowls or joints and forgot. After all, when he needs to be, he's just a dumb, roided out comedian whose advice or information shouldn't be trusted. I'll tell you what happened to Rogan. Fame and fortune happened. And sadly, all too many are willing to sell out their fellow humans for shekels. They can't sell out their fellow humans fast enough if the shekel amount's right. And that's a very, very sad reality we live in. So this kind of concludes my critical analysis. Joe Rogan, the Joe Rogan experience, the guests he has on, the IIA operation I believe it to be, and kind of diving into, other areas, IIA, and how they all relate to each other, and play off of each other. This deception and narrative control is so clearly seen by me that I'm amazed how many can't see it for themselves and they fall for it. It's pretty clear for me. I hope other people start seeing it clearly because we need it. The future is not bright for us if people don't start thinking at a higher level and don't bring some spirituality, into their thinking and into their body, because there's a big spiritual aspect of all this stuff, and people need to start reconnecting with the source more. And that, like I said, that doesn't mean there isn't valuable information, all along this way, because there is, but folks need to separate, again, the wheat from the chaff. They need to take the gold pill. So I hope you all found this information, informative and perhaps gained some new perspectives on things. That's what I'm here. I really want to, get people to, start gaining new perspectives, on what they think is the truth community. So, everyone out there, take care, stay safe, put on your higher thinking hat, try to take the gold pill if you can find it. And, like I said, just take care. This is Gold Pilled, signing off. Peace.